that lack of belonging and that pain and that trauma is inherited through a legacy of collective trauma. And, as I'm talking now, I'm also mindful of trying not to be attached to the identity of victimization.
Yeah.
Because that is also something very real, not just for Palestinians living inside Palestine, who of course undeniably suffer the most by this legacy that I'm discussing. Part of the reason I went into journalism, a big part, whether consciously or not, was born out of my Palestinian identity and my I was a very empathetic and very sensitive and very aware and very conscious, maybe more so than my parents ever wanted me to be, child. I was aware of these things that we're discussing now as adults. And so all that to say that invariably, the reason I went into the profession of journalism and focused on human rights and marginalized groups, whether African Americans in America, whether LGBT people, these groups who are discriminated against, who are robbed of their dignity, who are dehumanized. And it was born out of my very, very conscious recognition of dehumanization. And a kind of, on the flip side, going into this career in a place like America, where America, is so responsible for the sustained and prolonged occupation and dehumanization of Palestinians, not just through its military and economic aid to Israel. And I don't want to talk about politics because that's not where the solution lies in my mind. But trying to navigate after 9/11 in particular, being a journalist in the United States and trying to tell stories about the Arab world or Palestine or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or even not trying to tell those stories, I was seen as a threat by virtue of the fact that I exist as a Palestinian who did not fit the identity that was being propagated and presented, misrepresented, to the public in the US and in the mainstream media in general, that Palestinians are inherently violent and Palestinians are terrorists and Palestinians are savages. I can't tell you how many times, Salem, I wanted to pitch stories about Israel and Palestine in particular, but also the Arab world and the Muslim world, and that didn't have anything to do with violence or terrorism. This was during the Iraq War and then after 9/11. And there was an inability by a majority of the media to see the value in populations, Palestinian people, but more importantly, in stories of hope, stories of resilience, or stories that had nothing to do with the occupation. Or not nothing to do, but stories that weren't inherently political or inherently about the violence and the conflict, but more about, say it again, human stories. Yeah, human stories. There was a lack of interest and an inability to see the value in telling those stories, which is so disillusioning to me as a reporter. Forget my Palestinian origin or background or identity. That's where I think my disillusionment with media began, when there was an inability to shift out of telling stories in the same way. My mom used to always say to me, in Arabic, I'll translate it. It doesn't sound as impactful in English, but she used to say, like, if you do the same thing over and over and over and you expect a different result, then you're an idiot. And I felt like I was part of this idiotic system where it would cover this conflict in the same way. The false equivalence of Israel and Palestine, disregarding the David and Goliath dynamic between Israel and Palestine.
This wasn't happen with media outlets on the periphery of the industry. These are some of the top tier, most well-regarded, most well-known, most well-read, consumed media outlets.
Yeah.
And what you said about just my existence as a Palestinian was a threat is because, at least in my experience, is when they can't put you in a box,
100%,
stereotype, they censor you.
Yeah.
They want to silence you. And I guess that's your experience, and you've been very outspoken about that.
They disregard you almost as an instinctive knee-jerk reaction, because by merely existing as the Ahmed that I am, which is someone who is many things, not just Palestinian, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's lost on me this instinct of wanting to put people and compartmentalize and put them in a box. And I was, my name is Ahmed. I proclaimed I was Palestinian, and my parents are from Palestine, and yet I don't match what they see on the cover of Time magazine.
Yeah.
I'm not wearing always 24/7 a kafia, and I'm not always angry throwing a rock. These images that have been emblazoned in our minds over a period of time, and through propagating and perpetuating the same narratives. It's a convenient way of avoiding addressing what I would say is the real issues with any conflict, but particularly the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.